Hi there, it's Mark Carosa, Regional Director of Multifunds. Welcome to the First Time Seller Series, a 10-lesson series presented by Mazan Partners. And today, I'm joined by Casey Corey, founder and president of Mazan Partners. And we're going to dig into lesson number 2, your value proposition as a seller. But before we get started, please share this video with your colleagues. Maybe they're considering selling their practice, and this video could have exactly what they need to hear. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So Casey, I'm really excited to dig in today's topic, but before we do, please tell us a little bit about Mazan Partners and why you decided to create the First Time Seller Series.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you all for listening in. Um, Mazan Partners is a 24-year-old consulting firm that focuses on mergers, acquisitions, and succession planning for advisory practices. We've actually been doing this, focused on this solely for about the last 12 years, but the firm's 24 years old, and we were doing similar things prior to that. I really wanted to do a quote first time seller series, which is kind of a play on words to some degree, because we did for several years we did the first time buyer series, and the fact of the matter is that most first time sellers, it's the only time that they'll do it. Buyers can buy and do buy quite often. I mean, several times in their careers, and sometimes they do it almost as a serial buyer, maybe once a year, once every 2 years, something of that nature, especially in this time when we're doing a lot of consolidation. Every time they do it, they get better. As I said earlier, we've been doing this for at least 12 years, focused on it. And every time we do one, we learn something. A lot of it's about people, but it's about the business as well. Sellers hopefully sell once. Most people, that's what they do. They built their career. They built up something that they consider their baby to some degree, and they only do it once. So they're automatically, even though it's a seller's market, they're automatically at a disadvantage because you've got a buyer over here that's maybe done it 3, 4, 5 times, or at least once maybe, and you're at a bit of a disadvantage because they know what to expect and you don't. So anyway, that's really why I wanted to do it. I wanted to level the playing field a little bit for sellers, so that we have buyers and sellers that are to some degree on the same level when they're negotiating.
That's pretty powerful too, because as you point out, I mean, my word, when you only have one shot to do it right and it's your life's work, that's really putting a lot of pressure on yourself. So with that, because they only have one shot to get it right, I guess the big question is, what should sellers do to prepare to sell?
Yeah, I think it falls into two categories. There's the emotional side of a sale, emotional side of getting ready for it and also carrying through with it. And then there's obviously preparing your book for sale, which is obviously very important. So those, there's two real keys there that I think a seller needs to think about.
So we got emotional and then we got preparing the book for sale. So maybe I'll ask you a little bit, what do you mean by it? Let's dig a little deeper. What do you mean by emotionally?
So emotionally, most people go through 3 phases, of emotions when they sell a book or have a big life change. One is, the first one is sort of confusion and fear. And for our purposes in the advisory business, it's really fear of the unknown. Because if you are a first-time seller, then you haven't done it before. You may have read some things, or you may have buddies or friends that have told you, this is how you do it, or these are the things you look out for. Or you might have somebody like us to kind of hold your hand through the process. I always joke that that's really what I'm here for, is to hold people's hands through the process. But then you run into a level of excitement. So perhaps you've identified someone that you want to sell to, and so there's a level of excitement. Boy, I'm gonna get this done. I'm gonna make a big check or money over a period of time. I'm gonna have more time on my hands to do the things I always wanted to do. Play a lot more golf or whatever it is that you enjoy doing. More time with your spouse, which of course causes the third thing, which is anxiety. And that the anxiety kicks in mostly after you sell. It's a little bit before, but mostly after you sell, because you wonder, did I do the right thing? Was this the right time? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Those are things that you're going to run into. So what I always feel like is that the more you can plan your process, in other words, plan what you're going, the type of buyer you want to sell to, and then what your plan is after the sale, post-sale lifestyle, if you will. The more you can plan it, then you can kind of compartmentalize the emotions that are definitely going to come. I think I told you the other day that I had a client. We helped him sell his book to one of our clients um, in September, and he called me about a week ago, and he says, Casey, remember when you told me that I was going to have buyer or seller's remorse? And I said, yeah, I do remember that. He goes, well, I do. And he said, I've got it now. I need you to talk me off the ledge. And so we talked about where he was going with his life and what was his next step and all that kind of thing. So I just think we develop a relationship when we go through one of these things. So I felt like we needed to do that, but he needed to hear that so that he could again compartmentalize those emotions. Um, by the way, it's really important to be able to articulate to a seller a buyer, why you're selling. And one of the reasons for that is for you, but another reason for that is that a serious buyer, and we'll talk more about that, especially in another lesson, but a serious buyer only wants to work with serious sellers. I mean,
Sure.
there's a lot of work that goes into one of these transactions and the transition. When we do one, we spend somewhere between 200 and 300 hours on one,
Oh my.
um, and over maybe a 6-month period where we're finding them, identifying them, et cetera, and then working with them. So for a period of time, we're doing that. And so, a buyer really wants to work with somebody that they feel like is serious about it. They don't expect, that they'll always get you to buy or sell, but they do want to feel like that if they do everything right, that you are somebody that's at least predisposed to thinking about it. And so the more you can articulate to someone and make them feel like they're interested, then that's really what you want to do. Um, I'm reading a book. It's called The Attributes by a fellow by the name of Rich Diviney. He's a former special forces guy, and he's talking about the decisions sometimes that don't work out, but that you have to move forward. And you think about it, if you make a bad golf shot, you don't want it to ruin the rest of your day. You want to keep moving, and not let the thing you just did wrong affect the rest of your game.
That's
Well,
my
me too.
that's
I mean,
my case.
I have the same problem. But the point here is that the more you can plan ahead, then the more that when these little speed bumps or mistakes come up, or the fact that you're doing something you've never done before comes up, the more you plan ahead, the more you can sort of compartmentalize that and move on to the next step. So that's what I mean by sort of uh, preparing yourself emotionally for a sale.
And it's so interesting because I mean, you and I have been at this so long, and when we talk about business decisions, we're always told remove the emotion from the decision. But yet, in a situation like this, it's
You
almost
can't.
impossible. I mean, that practice, I mean, you think about it, the financial advisor came into the business probably in his 20s. He's now spent 40 years in it. These are people that are so dear to him. Maybe they go to their children's wedding, maybe they're godparents to their children, things of that nature. And now, not only are you going to walk away with it, but what am I going to do with the rest of my life, right? So many of these folks, I know for me, my personal friends, I'm an advisor. That's who I am. I associate myself, my identity with what I do, with what I've created. And gosh, I can hear you. It's hard to remove the emotion from it. And then the second thing that you mentioned earlier was not just the emotion, but preparing the book for sale. How does the financial advisor go about doing that? How do they prepare that book for sale?
Yeah, I mean, the emotional thing is, you've got one shot at it, but at one stroke of the pen, you become former trusted advisor, which is hard for a lot of people to accept, frankly. Um, and I think getting the book ready is part of that process, because as you're working to get the book ready, you're thinking about the emotional stuff as well, and it helps you work through it, because there's work to do, to prepare the book. There's a quote that I've heard from Warren Buffett, and it says, um, risk comes from not knowing what you're doing, which I
Uh,
always thought was kind of funny. But the first thing you need to do is get a valuation on the book.
okay.
We hear in the market that, and it changes, sometimes we'll hear that the books are worth 2 times revenue, or 4 or 5 times EBITDA, or sometimes it's 3 times revenue, and it does vacillate. It moves according to the market and things like that. As I said earlier, it is a seller's market. It is liable to continue to be a seller's market. But unlike what some people say, where it's like 50 to 1 or something like that, I really think it's less than that, because they're not 50 good qualified buyers in every market. We get about 3 to 5 requests a week for people to buy books and practices. We only take about 10% of them as clients, because the other 90% are not good buyers, in my opinion.
I see.
So we only want to work with the people that we can qualify, basically, and we'll talk about that in another lesson. But the valuation prepares you to know what you're negotiating for. If you leave it to chance, if you take some information you got out of a net magazine, or you listen to one of your friends who, by the way, maybe sold a widget factory, which has nothing to do with the way advisory firms work,
Right, right.
and you can't make that kind of comparison, because it's all about relationships in an advisory firm. Um, then you need to have something that tells you what it really is worth. Now, I will caution you, you can have 5 people do the valuation, and you're liable to get 3 or 4 different opinions. It might
Oh,
be some difference, but especially if you're using, well, whatever you're using, they're going to put data, and they're going to weigh data a certain way, and the guy next to him might weigh it just slightly different. But you can get a consensus and get a pretty good idea. You can almost get a valuation done anywhere. Usually somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 will get you a good solid valuation. We recommend a discounted cash flow approach,
okay.
and then a market approach, and then sort of look at them together, weigh the DCF approach a little heavier and the market approach a little less, but that'll help you balance it out. But you want to do that, because if you don't, then when somebody makes an offer to you, you have no idea if you're getting a good deal or not, quite frankly.
So once the seller has that valuation completed, what else can they do to help prepare that book?
Well, some of what I'm about to say is redundant, because the information that you have to get ready for evaluation will be included in what I'm about to say.
Oh,
But you want to gather this information. You want to get tax returns and P&L statements, and 4 to 5 years of financial statements. You want to get information from your broker dealer if you have one, so that you can get runs of information. Your custodian can do the same thing for you, depending on what kind of book you have. But you want to get all that together, and you'll need that for the valuation, and if your buyer is using a bank, then they'll want it too. Then you've got a list. Then I would tell you to sit down and make a list of clients. Now, I'm not saying names. You don't want to put the names on them. Make it client 1, client 2, etc. And on that list, I think you want asset balances. You want investment mix, whatever the product is or service that you sold them. You want the amount of revenue that's being generated. You want to know whether it's commission or recurring revenue. You want the age of the clients. It's important to know that, because your buyer is going to want to know if your clients are all taking their required distributions, or are they in their 50s or 60s. And by the way, if they're in their 50s or 60s, your book is going to be worth more. And then you've got the number of years they've been a client. Now, most people don't ask for that, but the reason we want to know about it is because it speaks to the relationship that you have with your client. If you've been a client for a year and you go to them and say, you know what, I want to sell my book to Mark, and I think he's a great guy, that's liable to fall on deaf ears. But if you've had that client for 25 years or 10 years, and you go to him and say, you know what, I'm retiring, Mark is a really good guy, you've trusted me for 15, 20 years, trust me one more time when I tell you Mark's your guy, take my advice, then it will bear fruit. Or let's say you've seen them, you've had them for 20 years, but you've only seen them 4 times in that length of time. Again, deaf ears. So the point is, you want to know how many years this person's been your client, and that tells the buyer, a little bit about the relationship that you have with those clients. If you've got more than about $100,000 a year in commission business, then I would make sure that you can define where that business comes from. When a seller or buyer looks at a book that has a lot of commission in it, they're trying to decide, am I going to be able to recreate that revenue? Remember, they're looking at the book to determine whether or not there's enough revenue in it for them to pay the premium, pay the principal and interest, pay the staff, and obviously make a profit. I mean, these things, you don't do this if it's not a profitable venture. And so they want to know what those sources of revenue are. So if you've got annuities that are throwing off a 1%, trailer, or you got mutual funds that are doing the same thing, or what if you've got a whole bunch of money in alternative investments and they're not, you can't get at them, there's not going to be anything you can do with those. On the other hand, if you've got a whole bunch of alts that that are about to come up for expiration or something like that, and the distributions are liable to come in, that makes the book a little more valuable. So there's lots of things like that you want, but the most important thing is to determine what the sources of revenue are, what it is annually, and what is it likely to be over the next 3 to 5 years, 1 to 5 years, we'll say. No one is ever going to be able to guarantee that the revenue will be there. I mean, if you can have a mutual fund and it's got a trail, and then the day after the sale, he can cash in the mutual fund, and so it's gone, But the more you can give the buyer that kind of data, the better chance you're gonna get a better price. I've got a client right now or a seller, and we're trying to acquire his book, and he's mostly commission. So we had to go in and look at everything to determine what the value of the book was first, but secondly, the seller or the buyer wants to know, how much of that can I get? He had some annuities, and he's thinking some of those are 20, 25 years old, and he's saying, well, can I roll those over? Can I do something new with them? Or if it's a life insurance product, we've had changes in mortality tables over the years. those kinds of things. But the more you can define where the revenue comes from and what the future of that revenue is, the better off you're going to be. More prepared you are, the quicker you're gonna proceed along the road. And I think that's really important. I mean, you don't want to rush these things. You want to do it, in a judicious manner. However, when a buyer is ready to go and they've got the money to pay you and they're ready to pull the trigger and you like them and you think they're a good buyer, you want to be ready. You want to be ready to move forward.
The thing that's been popping into my head as you've been talking, I keep thinking about, okay, we started by saying, number one, that a seller has one shot to get it right. And we've talked a lot about the valuations and preparing the book. And I was just thinking as you were going through that, it seems to me, at least in my experience, and I've been wholesaling, going back to 2000, so it's been 20 years. But it seems like so often we don't think about selling the book or retiring until we're in our mid 60s. But the reality is the clients of the advisor are typically the same age or older. And as you mentioned, the older the book gets, the less value is retained in the book. And it really seems like, boy, if we could get this message out to advisors that are in their 50s, 10 years or so before they're looking to sell their book, it seems like there could be a tremendous amount of value that's either obtained or, not on purpose, but gee, just with some, lack of understanding that the value of their book diminishes without realizing there was some preparation that could have been done. So, I find this to be really fascinating. And, as always, I really enjoy every chance I get to spend with you. And, this has been another wonderful, insightful lesson. And, more than anything, I really do hope that we've given financial advisors that are considering selling their practice some powerful insight. I probably ask you one last question. Gosh, without the insight, they could probably lose what, 10, 15, 20% of the value, right? Wouldn't that be the case?
Well, I can tell you that that a well-prepared seller could get more for it, maybe 10, 15, 20%, because buyers look at good buyers look at buying and then they look at the risk of buying. They're getting ready to give somebody $1 million or more. They want to look at their risk. The more data, the more you can give them, the less risk they have, because I always tell people, I tell sellers, any kind of data that you don't give me will increase our risk, which is liable to lower our price because we have to protect ourselves. And I tell buyers the same thing, so we want them to be prepared because we want them to get what, we always say we want a win-win out of the deal. And I know every book you ever read on negotiating says there's no such thing as a win-win. But the fact is, after all these years, one thing that we do know is that if both sides are not equally excited about the transition, then the transaction will not, if they're not equally excited about the transaction, then the transition will not go as well as it should. You can buy something and not get the clients, and you've wasted your money. And you as a seller, you want to make sure that those clients are taken care of. You've chosen somebody that you think could be the person to do that. If they're not moving over and going to that person, then you're going to feel bad somewhere down the road. So I think that the more that you can do this, the better off you're going to be. And if the additional data that you provide to them on a timely manner can help them decrease or at least mitigate their risk, you can get better terms. You get the money quicker, meaning more more of a down payment, less length in terms of how long you get paid, and quite often you'll get maybe 10 or 15% more in the price as well. And we tell our buyers that they ought to do that because the seller has mitigated their risk. I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. I would characterize him as a serial buyer. He buys 4 or 5 books a year. He's in what you would call an aggregator. I asked him what is the one thing that you look for in sellers to determine if you're going to move forward with them, because he moves quick, and he said the more prepared they are, the more data they have, the more they have their financial act together and know where they're coming from, the more interested we are in them, because now we can help with the risk. And the last thing I'll say about this is that when you can generate that data quicker, then you know that your risk has been minimized. You're going to get a lot more buyers, is what I'm trying to say. A lot more good buyers are the ones that you're really interested in having. So anyway.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because just a reminder to everybody, this is a 10-part series, 10 lessons, and the next one, lesson number 3, what to look for in a buyer. So please send your confidential questions to me, Mark Carrozza, and Casey Corey. You'll see our addresses there. Mark Carrozza is mark.carrozza@multi-funds.com or ccorey@mazonpartners.com. And until next time, here's wishing you and your clients health and prosperity.
Thank you all.